So the first thing I want to just open up with is talking a little bit about where we are, like what time it is. And I want to do that in a little bit of a different way, which is by grounding us in the stories of people. So there's a push right now to try to understand how this happened, right? We've seen graphs and charts and data, right? And if any of you turn on the television, there's a million analyses around how we got to this place. But then there's also an analysis that we need to just hold close, which is the stories of people for whom this matters, like physically, tangibly, like folks that are waking up in the middle of the night in cold sweats, like what does this mean for the future of this country, for the future of the world? But also the people who are going about their daily lives, because in reality, what happened on Tuesday doesn't change much for them. In their minds, in their experiences, in their everyday, what happened on Tuesday, who sits in the White House, feels like it doesn't matter for them. And I also want to propose that part of how we got here was because of the success of resistance movements that have emerged over the last 10 years. That part of the backlash, yes, absolutely, is about anxiety. It is about the widening gap between people who have and people who don't have. But it is also very much a response to some of the powerful movements that have emerged after Hurricane Katrina, when we broke open this myth of living in a post-racial society. Some of the movements that emerged as state-sanctioned violence became more and more obvious to more and more people. Because it was always happening, right? It was always happening. But it became more and more obvious to more and more people, meaning it started to come into the homes and the television screens and the cell phone screens of more and more people, okay? The movements that have emerged to protect the things that we depend on, like water, like air, like land, and the movements that have emerged to talk about the failure, the ongoing failure, of an economy that is built on the notion that making money is the most important thing that you can do. That making money off of somebody else is the most important thing that you can do. So I want to just re-ground us there as a way to talk about how we got here and also where we go from here. I might differ in loving ways with some previous comments that were made today around what's driving some of the anxiety that folks are feeling. There's lots of ways in which people will say, you know, this is really a backlash and an anxiety that's being driven by an inability to reach the American dream. And I think that's true for some segments of the population. I think what's also true is that we have to really ground ourselves in the notion that, and in the reality that this is a white settler nation. So that anxiety, that resentment is not a new phenomenon. And it ebbs and flows in relationship to changes in the economy. It ebbs and flows in relationship to changes in the way that people understand their faith and what role their faith plays in their everyday life. And it also ebbs and flows in relationship to the political system that governs this nation. I'm currently rereading a book by Edward Baptist called The Half Has Never Been Told: The Making of American Capitalism and Slavery. And the thing that keeps moving me about this is the ways in which this nation was able to come together, a deeply divided nation, was able to come together on the backs of Black people and on the genocide of indigenous nations. That has not changed. it just keeps repeating itself in different forms. But the other thing that I feel is really, really important for us to just ground ourselves in, because we keep trying to understand, well, who was the demographic that really voted for this demagogue? Who has a vision that we have only heard about in sci-fi novels? Those of us who have been reading Octavia Butler and other science fiction folks, we're like, oh no, we knew this was coming, right? But for those of us who have not, get into it. For those of us who have not, I think what we keep forgetting in a nation that is built on amnesia, it's powered by amnesia, is that this notion of who deserves and who doesn't deserve will trump everything all the time, no pun intended. So given that, what is our primary task right now? And the answer to that, I would say, is that it is our task to continue to build the movement of movements that has been emerging over the last 10 years. But to rethink how we think about who belongs in that movement. So I am somebody who is born and raised in California. I'm born and raised in the Bay Area. California is a bubble in relationship to the rest of what's going on in the country and in the world. And I've been blessed with the opportunity to build with some important freedom fighters here in Detroit, changed my viewpoint on what we need to do in terms of building movement. But I've also been blessed to have been able to spend some time here, not in the objectifying way, in the way that people talk about Detroit, which is like it's the city that lost, right? It's a ghost town. These are things that people say, but what I understood and came to understand very deeply about Detroit is that it's a city that has been building underground for a very long time. A city that has said, we know we can't depend on the state to meet our needs. We know that we have to depend on each other. We know that we can't just talk about what alternatives we have to build because we have to live those alternatives as water is getting shut off, as homes are being abandoned, as critical resources in our communities are being stripped from us. We can't wait for the state to get it together. So thank you for teaching me that. And what it's taught me also is that in moments like this, which many cities beyond Detroit have been living for a while now, that our primary task is to keep building the broad-based movement that will save all of our lives, but to do it in a little bit of a different way, to ensure that that movement is multi-class, multiracial, multinational, multi-gendered. Now, I'm somebody who helped to create an idea, a hashtag, an organizing network that talked very specifically about the role of Blackness and anti-Blackness and its relationship to state-sanctioned violence. And the number one critique that I hear about Black Lives Matter, particularly from people who are not Black, is that this is an identity-based movement. And so I just have to keep pushing back on that notion. Because to understand the racial resentment, the racial entitlement, and the ways in which it interacts and interplays with economic anxiety, and the overall failure of a political system to meet the needs of most people, we have to understand how anti-Blackness functions in our society. And then we have to commit to dismantling it if we hope to save any of our lives. Far from identity politics, the realities that Black people and poor people and women and people who are not on the gender spectrum are facing in this moment, the experiences of real people should not only shape policy, but they should shape our movements as well. So, when we talk about where we have to go from here, and when we talk about what's identity-based and what's experience-based, I can't help but remember people like Trayvon Martin. I can't help but remember people like Renisha McBride. I can't help but think about people like Maya Hall, people like Gabrielle De Jesus, people like Penny Proud, people like Ayanla Stanley Jones and her family, who has been left to deal with the aftermath of the ways in which being Black and being poor in Detroit shapes their existence, but also shapes the possibility and the potential for their future. So, we need to build a different kind of movement that continues to push to take back the things that we've won, but also continues to pull in new people into the fight who should have been there in the first place. The way that we do that, in my opinion, is not just by opposing what is wrong, what is fascist, what is xenophobic, what is racist, what is capitalist, imperialist about our president-elect. It's not just about opposing those things. And it's not just about him. But it is also very much about organizing and building power. It is very much about being led by the solutions that already exist in seed form and creating space to water and nurture those solutions. Not to try to scale them up to a federal level or a national level, but to try to scale them to a community level where people can actually benefit from the things that they need. And then the second task for us in this moment is to protect people, to have each other's back. Rashad talked about the deep need of every single person for connection. But there's also a deep need for every single person to feel safe, to feel like there's another day that's coming, and that that other day can somehow be assured. When I turn on the television, when I go down the street in my liberal town of Oakland, California, home of the Black Panther Party, but new home to venture capitalists and tech giants. And I hear stories from my friends about what's been happening in the week since we elected a new leader. Stories of people walking their dogs on Madison Street, right by the courthouse where Black Panthers Bobby Seale and Huey Newton stood with rifles to protect our communities. Stories of having eggs thrown at you, being told, go back to Chinatown. This is Trump town. When I tell you that today, in Oakland, California, Oakland, that a friend of mine was run over by a car. And in that car, they said, Black lives don't matter. That was today. So you see, protecting each other and providing for each other is going to be a core task in an administration and in a political context where there is a push to take from us the things that we have fought so hard for. When our new president says, I am going to repeal Obamacare. What that means is my neighbor with disabilities will not be able to access the things that they need. What it means is my trans family who depend on hormones to live in the world with dignity will not be able to access those things. And what do we do about that? In real tangible time. How do we share our resources to make sure that everybody has something? That is the symbol of a changing society. What happens when people come together to provide for each other? Finally, I think that we can be looking to Detroit as a model for how it is that we build abundance within scarcity, and more importantly, again, how it is that we live alternatives. I'll end with this. I think we owe it to ourselves to get a little more salient and clear about what is happening right now and who is being impacted and how we are being impacted. Because the thing is, a wrong diagnosis of the problem leads to the wrong kinds of solutions. For example, understanding the movement for Black lives solely as a movement to protect Black men from police violence is an error. The movement for Black lives is a movement to save the lives, the humanity, and the dignity of Black people in a country that is inherently anti-Black. Which means we have to understand that as saving and protecting Black women, Black families, Black queer people, Black trans people, Black people with disabilities, Black immigrants. It means we have to understand the relationship of communities of color and access, for some, to the promise of white nationalism. It means that we have to understand the relationship of our communities to a state that tries to disappear us, that profits from disappearing us. And it means that we have to rebuild a culture where we understand very deeply that we don't all come from the same place, but we all belong here. It means building a culture where we understand very deeply that our histories are connected in ways that we should be proud of, but also in ways that we should hope to only ever see again in museums. This is how we used to be, but this is now who we are. So in closing, the real closing, not the preacher closing, we have to protect our ability to reimagine who we can be, what we can be together. We have to use this moment as a real reckoning, an honest accounting of how we haven't shown up for each other. An honest accounting of how we have not shown up for each other. Not in the, I'm your ally, I have Black friends, I love y'all people, but a real accounting of how the fears that have been stoked in our society are driving our decisions, which are impacting people's everyday ability to eat, to raise a family, to raise your child to become an adult, or just to be able to come out of your house and walk down the street without the threat or the reality of violence. If we can accomplish this, then we have won. Thank you.